Where did all the 35mm SLRs go? In this edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus, I'm going to look back at the year 1971 and just talk about some of the cameras that were available back then. Recently, I was looking at a 1971 issue of the Photography Directory and Buying Guide. You can see it's fallen apart. I've had this for so long. I believe it came out in late 1970. And basically it listed all the cameras that were available at the time, as well as lenses and flash and enlargers and everything photographic. And it was put out by Popular Photography magazine. I was going through this book and I couldn't believe how many 35mm SLRs that were available back then. There were over 20 manufacturers and over 50 different cameras. Now, some manufacturers just made one, others made several, but it was just amazing to me. So I kind of went through the list. There's a little brief thing about each of the cameras, as you can see here. It gives, some specifics, some of the features, and the price. And so what I did, I just picked out 10 that I want to specifically talk about. Now, most of these cameras I remember from back then, but really haven't thought about them. And a few of them, of course, are more famous than others. So the first one I just want to talk about is the Topcon Superd. That was a professional level camera with a built-in meter. It had interchangeable finders and screens, but the meter was built into the body, unlike the Nikon F, where the meter was in the prism finder. And it had the Topcon Exacta bayonet mount. Like I said, interchangeable finders and screens. It also took a motor drive, shutter speeds from 1 to 1/1000th of a second. It was an averaging meter for full aperture metering. Kind of something I wasn't too crazy about was a front-mounted shutter release. So you pressed in on it rather than down from the top of the camera. That camera listed back in 1971, or I should say 1970. This issue came out, this guide came out at the end of 1970, and it sold for $388 with a 58mm 1.8 lens. Heard a lot of good things about this camera. I knew someone who owned one back in the day, but I never actually used one myself. Okay, the next camera is one of the first SLRs ever made, at least the company that manufactured it made one of the first, or even maybe even the first 35mm SLR ever made, and it's the Exacta VX1000. It had the Exacta bayonet, interchangeable finders and screens, no meter, shutter speeds from 12 to 1/1000th of a second. And the unique thing about this camera, it was really a left-handed camera. It had a shutter release on the front, like the Topcon Superd, but it was on the left side. And the camera was kind of shaped funny. And also the film advance was on the left side. So it was a good camera for lefties. And if you ever saw the movie Rear Window with James Stewart, he's laid up with a broken leg. He was a photographer and he had a camera set up on a tripod. It was an Exacta with a long lens, and he was focusing on people across the courtyard. He lived in an apartment building and it was across the courtyard in their windows, and he witnessed a murder. Good movie if you ever have the opportunity to see it. Okay, number 3 is a very inexpensive camera. It's a camera I had considered back then. It's a Praktica TL. Now this picture is of the Super TL. I don't know much about that one, but the Praktica was a very inexpensive camera. It took the M42 screw mount, so it used Pentax lenses. A lot of cameras used those M42 lenses. It had speeds from 1 to 1/500th of a second. It had an overall averaging meter, and all those cameras that took the M42 back in those days were stop-down metering, so you actually metered at the working aperture. It also had a front release, but on the right side. And this release was angled, as you could see in the picture. So I think it would be a little easier to use than the front-mounted one that you had to push in. That sold with a 50mm 2.8 lens for $165. Again, these are list prices. Usually back then you could have got them cheaper. The next camera is one of the first automatic cameras with auto exposure, and it was a Kanuka Auto Reflex T. It took the Kanuka bayonet mount. It had shutter priority, so you selected the shutter speed, the camera selected the aperture. It had shutter speeds from 1 to 1/1000th of a second. It had a full area averaging meter that metered at full aperture. It came with a 52mm 1.8 lens, and it sold for $249.95. Number 5 in my list is the Mamiya Secor 1000 DTL. It also took the M42 mount, so of course it had stop-down metering, speeds from 1 to 1/1000th of a second, and something not too common with this camera, it had averaging meter, and you could also switch it to a spot meter, so that was a really nice feature. It came with a 55mm 1.8 lens, and it listed for $234. Now, most of these cameras, the 50-1.8 or the 50 f2 were their entry-level lens, and you would also have the option of other lenses. Most of these cameras you could also get a 50 or a 55 or even a 58 1.4 for a higher cost. Okay, number 6 is a very interesting camera. It's the Miranda Sensor X. It had a bayonet mount. It had interchangeable finders and screens, but no motor. Speeds from 1 to 1/1000th of a second. It had a semi-spot metering, kind of bottom-weighted semi-spot metering, metered at full aperture. It also had a front release like the Topcon, so you pressed in on it. And with a 50 1.8 lens, it sold for $264.95. Seemed like it was a very nicely made camera. All right, next, number 7, we have the Petri FT. It utilized a different lens mount, the Petri breech lock mount. It had an averaging meter, and it had a front angled release like the Praktica. It came with a 55mm 1.8, and it sold for $199.95. Coming down the home stretch here. Number 8 is the Rico TLS41. It also took the M42 mount, which means it had stop-down metering, speeds from 1 to 1/1000th of a second, and it also had the option of spot or averaging meter, and a unique feature on this camera. It had a fixed prism, but you could use it as a waist level finder by looking through the top, or a regular eye level finder. So kind of unique in that respect. With a 55mm 1.4, it sold for $279.50. I couldn't find a price with the 55 1.8, so that's why the price on this one is comparatively a little higher than the others, because most of them are with a 1.8 lens. Okay, next we have the most expensive camera in this bunch, the Zeiss Contrax Super Electronic. Very complex camera, speeds from 1 to 1/1000th of a second, had interchangeable screens. I am not sure if this had interchangeable finders. I don't believe it did, but it's possible that it did. Can't find too much information on this camera. I do remember it though. It had a spot meter, full aperture metering, and it also took an accessory that would convert it to full auto, and it had an electronic shutter. That's where the word electronic comes in the name, so it required a battery for operation. From what I understand, it was a very complex camera, not the most reliable camera in the world. Took excellent lenses. The standard lens was a 50mm f2 planar. But the list price, now we're talking 1971, late 1970, 1971, $999.95. Way more expensive than the Nikon FTN at the time, more expensive than the Leica Flex SL. So I don't think they probably sold too many of them. And finally, we have the least expensive camera on my list, the Zenith E. This camera also took the M42 mount. It was made in Russia. It had shutter speeds from 1/30th of a second to 1/500th of a second. So it had the most narrow shutter speed range of any of these cameras. It had an external uncoupled selenium meter. So this camera, although it was being sold in the early 70s, really looked a lot more like a camera from the 50s. It came with a 58mm 2.0 lens, and it sold for $59.95. Looking at the prices of these other cameras, it's pretty amazing that you could get a camera that cheap back then. So things have really changed, right? I mean, digital has taken over. Both mirrorless, DSLR, actually DSLR seem to be on their way out somewhat. But we don't have nearly the number of manufacturers of cameras as we did back then. Like I said, there were over 20. Nor do we have as many camera models to choose from, although using Nikon as an example, back then Nikon had the Nicormat FTN, the Nikon F with plain prism, and the Nikon FTN. So Nikon had 3 models. Today, I don't even know how many models Nikon has, but it's quite a few. And the same for Canon. Sony wasn't in the still camera business back then, but they have quite a few models as well. But we're really limited as to manufacturers today, not nearly as many as back then. The good thing is most of these cameras you could still find on eBay, or at your local camera shop or thrift stores at a very good price if you just want to play around one of these old cameras. Now, I recently ordered a Mamiya Secor 1000D TL, got it for a very good price, and also a Kanuka Auto Reflex T. Now, I'm not sure if the meters work on either of these cameras, but I didn't care about that. I just want to add them to my collection. So tell me what you think, if you have used any of these cameras, what you think about them. Do they still work well? Did you buy them back in the day, or did you pick them up used recently? So let me know in the comments below, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. I always try to respond to all questions and comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I always come out with a new video every Monday morning and Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.